Hey guys, this is Andrew Smith. I'm a character artist in the game industry and a college instructor. And I also run artbysmitty.com. You guys can get a bunch of cool stuff here. So this tutorial is going to be a Substance Painter 101. And what I'm going to be doing is taking an asset from ZBrush, Brutus the Bulldog here from the university that I teach at, Ferris State. This is their logo, so you guys can get an idea of what it looks like in 2D and my rendition of it in 3D. We're going to prep this ZBrush file. It's got multiple Z tools, broken up accordingly based on how I want to bake. And I've gone through and I've ZBrushed all of these to a decent number. I have not gone through and created a proper retopology of the meshes, just for the sake of the tutorial, to keep it quick and to get into Substance Painter. So I'm going to be using 3ds Max to export this model, the ZBrushed model of all these different pieces. You guys can follow along using Maya, Blender, whatever it is that you want to use. Doesn't really matter. We're not doing anything Max specific in this tutorial. You guys may have seen I contributed to an article on Algorithmics forum working on Farpoint as a character artist, and here I'm kind of highlight some of the particle brushes inside of Substance Painter. But in this tutorial, we're going to be covering prepping your model in ZBrush, exporting things out of Max, and then baking in Substance Painter, and also just a 101, basically how to get ready and get using Substance Painter. So here we go. Okay, so for the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to be prepping all these subtools for Substance. And to do that, what we need to do is we obviously need to apply colors, right, to our model that represent material ID passes or bakes. So this guy, he's like orange or something. I'm going to make him orange and say fill object. I'll select the collar, and I believe that's a red color. Now you guys can use any colors that you want for these. They're just used to isolate a material ID pass. So teeth, I'm just going to do them white. Tongue will do something that's close to red, but not quite. More teeth, they can be white as well. Spikes, we probably want those to be a different color. And then we have this medallion down at the bottom with the Ferris F logo on it. Grab like something different, like a green. Then we got this Taurus knot, just a Taurus. We'll do something we'll do an aqua color. That should be good enough. And do we have any more subtools? We do not. So we're ready to go. We have a polypaint applied. However, there's a few things that I might want to apply polypaint to in Substance Painter to isolate. For instance, the pupils and the iris. So I'm going to go ahead and hopefully do that here. So I need to go back up to the Brutus, and I'm going to make sure I hit Shift F so I can see. Oh, I do have my polygroups, which that's good. So I'm going to hold Control Shift, isolate the eyes, and we'll go ahead and make this some other color, maybe like a purple. And Control Shift click in space, and then I'm going to go ahead and isolate the iris, and we can make those, a yellow or something, a dark yellow fill. Control Shift click in space, and I think we're good. Maybe the nose. However, the nose, I believe I just sculpted in. I wasn't smart when I did this, or I probably Dynameshed it or something. So we'll probably just have to forego that. If I was smart, I would have kept that as a separate polygroup. So something to think about while you guys are sculpting. Now we have to do one more thing to all these subtools before we can export them out as, say, OBJs. All right, so with each one of your subtools individually, we're going to have to do this. It's kind of a pain, and it'd be great to have a script or to someone to write a script. But hold Shift, click on Export, and turn off Group for each one of these. Go down to the collar, hold Shift, turn off Group, and I'm going to do this to each one of these while you guys, and I'll pause the. Okay, so I've gone through each one of my subtools, and I've gone down to Export and unchecked the group. Now, you guys will notice there's no geometry here for the F that was in the logo down here. And actually, small things like that, we can, and even these little dots by the muzzle, we can do that height information in Substance Painter, which is great. Okay, so from here I'm going to export each one of these individually as an OBJ. They will come with the polypaint information in the OBJ file, and that's pretty much it. We just have to be careful what we name things. So naming conventions here are very important because we're going to have to duplicate those naming conventions in, say, Max or Maya or whatever 3D app you're exporting your low poly from. So with Brutus, I'm going to go ahead and hit export. It doesn't matter what the subtool is named. I'm just going to be working off my desktop, and I'm going to call this one Brutus_HP. Hit save, and we wait for it to export. And so guys, I'm going to pause the video here, but go through and export each one of your OBJs with a certain naming convention. And yeah. Before, I guess I didn't quite pause it, but I wanted to point one thing out is I've got teeth, right? So I'm going to turn everything off, turn the other set of teeth on. Now what I've gone through is I've put these two teeth in different groups. And I can move these guys up real quick. Because what I want to do is I want to bake these separately, so when they're baking, the cages aren't intersecting with each other and baking information within one another. So that's why I'm doing every other, kind of like that. So again, I'm going to pause the video and then we'll get back when I'm done exporting all of these as OBJs. All right, guys. So I've gone through and exported each one of these as OBJs. They are on my desktop in a folder that I called Brutus. And I just have all my high poly OBJs here. And so these are the naming conventions I need to take note of. And so I'm going to be putting the low poly object in here as well, but we can export that as a single FBX file. But the objects within that FBX file have to be named the same. And you guys can see right now, they're all just called random objects, right? So I need to go through and match the naming conventions up with these. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the head, the Brutus, and call this Brutus_LP. And I can go to the next one. These are the spikes. Call these spikes_LP. Again, LP for low poly. And I'm going to pause the video while I go through and name all these. All right, guys. So I went through and I did that, and you guys can see here that all of these naming conventions match these naming conventions of the high polys. Now, the other thing that you're probably going to need to do is after you've done a proper retopo of your high poly, you're going to want to make sure that all of these objects, if you want them to be on the same texture sheet, you need to make sure that one material is applied to all of these. So I'll just grab a material and assign it to all of them and assign to selection. Now, if you don't do this, if you have multiple different materials applied, then you're going to be exporting multiple textures, which obviously we want them all in one. Now, if you're going to be working in Substance, your object has to be obviously unwrapped. Now, these were all at one point one object, and I brought them into 3D Coat and unwrapped them and put them on the same sheet. So to double check that, I can just select all of these guys, throw an unwrap UVW modifier on this, and I'm just going to double check to make sure that I have a proper unwrap for this guy. So say open UV editor, and there we are. Everything's laid out nice and clean. Now this could have been a little bit better, but it's decent enough. Got a little bit of wasted space. Maybe the color could have been done a little bit better, but this will work. So I'm going to go ahead and delete the unwrap UVW modifier. That's not going to edit anything or adjust the UVs. And so now I can select all of these objects, and I can say File, I want to export all of these guys, export selected, and put them in the Brutus folder. I'm just going to call this one Bake Me. And we don't want this to be an OBJ, we want this to be an FBX. And we're just going to go through and take a look. So we have a few options here. One thing that we're going to want to use is we're going to want to preserve the tangents and the binormals, and we're also going to want to triangulate this based on the same triangulation that you're going to import into your game engine. Otherwise, if you're baking with different triangles or normals on your faces or your verts, you're going to get different shading results in your render engine. So just make sure that we're triangulating and we're preserving the tangents and binormals. I don't need any animation. I don't have any cameras. I don't have any lights, and I don't have any media. So from there, we're pretty good to go. I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. It takes a second, and we're just going to double check to make sure that those things exported neatly. And there it is. There's my FBX with all my high polys. Now we're good to go and open up Substance Painter. All right, so we're back in Substance. And guys, I don't know if this is the default setup for Substance Painter or not. I'm just going to keep it like this as we go forward. Just note that, at work, or, my personal setup, you can move some of these things over to your other monitor. I'm just going to keep them all here so you guys can follow along good. Anyways, we've got our toolbar up top. We've got texture set settings. We've got viewers, so you guys can take a look at all this stuff. They finally put the shelf now, so it's easier to manage. I am using Substance Painter 2.4.1. If you want to follow along, they are pretty good at making changes. So anyway, to get started, let's go File, New, and let's go up here to Select Template. If you're doing some Dota 2 workshop stuff, you check that out. I have a nice 12-part video section on creating a Dota 2 weapon. But we're going to be using Unreal Engine 4, and so I know that I need to be using PBR Metal Roughness. Now, we could do HQ, or if you guys are doing something with, say, hair cards, you'd want to be using, PBR Metal Rough with Alpha. So I'm just going to be coming over here, PBR Metal Rough. Now, you're going to want to make sure that you click Compute Tangent Space per Fragment, and then Document Resolution, whatever you want to use. Just going to set that to 4K. Guys, the cool thing about Substance is it can upres because it's doing texturing in 3D space. So it can upres all of your different maps, which is amazing. So I'm going to go ahead, and now I need to select a mesh. Now I need to go to Brutus and grab that FBX file. The low poly objects are all included in this FBX. They're unwrapped, and they're named correctly to correspond with the high polys. So I'll say Open and hit OK. Now, you guys might see a different viewport setting. If you guys hit F3, you're going to be here in your 2D space. If you hit F4, I believe, no, F2 will be 3D space, F3 is 2D, and F1 will give you both at the same time, which is kind of cool. Now, you guys, this viewport navigates a lot like Maya. Just Alt, left mouse, rotate, Alt, middle mouse button to pan, and then Alt and right to zoom in and out. Pretty much the same thing in 2D space, except that, Alt right click is going to rotate. You guys can hold Shift to snap. Sometimes for me it's easier to draw a straight line if I rotate my canvas a little bit. Set that guy back to normal, and I'm going to go back just to F2 and 3D space. I usually am only working with one view open at a time, unless I have, like, say, an object with, 100 different objects, like 001 LP, 02 LP, which, if you're doing something like, a mech or something with a lot of pieces, you might have to do that. And I'm sure if you're at a studio, they can make scripts. A tech artist can go in and make a script for you. So you're lucky then. Anyways, let's get on. We want to bake. So bake settings, where are those? Well, let's take a look. So to find your baking settings, it's actually under the texture set settings. And I'm just going to move this guy down a little bit. Maybe, what we can do is just move the display settings. We don't care about that right now. We don't care about the viewer settings right now. Those are usually off on my other monitor. I'm not used to this limited display. So we're worried right now about baking these textures because all these smart materials that Substance is great in using needs your maps. If you don't have maps, you're going to have a fun time working in Substance Painter. Say that sarcastically. So I'm going to click Bake Textures. And guys, I'm going to turn off everything but my normal map right now because what I'm doing is I'm just testing things to see if I've been good and I've set everything up correctly. I'm not going to worry about really anything. So I'm going to go ahead and hit high definition meshes and click the little new icon, and I'm going to hold Shift and click all of these OBJs, hit open, and that's it for now, except down here we've got this high poly and low poly mesh suffix, what comes after it. And if you guys remember, I called these _HP, all caps, and _LP, all caps. So we can change those right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click Bake Textures and pause this while it bakes, and we're going to find out if I did a good job or not. Okay, so it looks like I'm good. I know what I'm doing. Great. I'm just guys, if you're following along, check out your mesh, make sure things baked out. If things didn't bake out correctly, you probably named something different. Yeah, and you'll notice over here my texture set window, that's all the texture sets I had. So if I applied more than one material to these guys, they would have different texture sets, and they'd actually export as different textures. So the fact that I'm seeing one texture set here is because the material I applied to all these in that low poly FBX out of max was because that material is called default, and that's it. So just something to note. But if you guys, if we zoom in, we're baking a 4K map, but does that look like detail that you'd see on a 4K map? No way, man. There's aliasing going on. The quality is just really bad. Right? It's not good. So let's go through and actually bake a good map now that we know things work. Trust me, I've gone through and thought I had everything right and maxed all my settings out and then waited, an hour and found out my naming conventions are wrong. So don't do that. Anyways, I'm going to go ahead and enable all of these bad boys. Now, just a quick note, your ambient occlusion and your thickness passes are going to take the longest. They could take, depending on your computer, anywhere from a minute to 10 minutes a pop. So be careful. Know what your computer can handle. Anyways, let's go back up to common, and match is set right now to always. And I'm going to close this real quick. Now, the reason it's set to always is it's saying every mesh is going to bake together. That's why I'm getting some of these baking errors, because let me hold the bracket key down here. You'll see that some of the information from this tooth is baking onto this tooth, giving me these errors right along here. And we obviously don't want that. We want, Brutus's head to bake with Brutus's head and not the collar, right? Because right here you can see these little errors. That's because it's projecting information from the collar onto Brutus's head, and we obviously don't want that. So let's tell it to bake only the objects that have the same naming conventions. Also, guys, so I'm moving the light around. That's if you go hold Shift and right click, you're going to move the light around, which is great. Okay, bake textures. Let's say instead of always, let's say by mesh name. Now it's only going to bake the head to the head and the spikes to the spikes, etc. Anti-aliasing, let's go ahead and set that to something like 4x4. If you guys click on 8x8, it's going to look, you're hardly going to notice a difference, and it's going to take 4 times as long. So 4x4 works great for me with a 4K map. Now you notice my output size is 1024, so let's change that to 4K. All right, boom, boom, boom. Let's reactivate all these guys, and guess what? Do we want the ambient occlusion to bake with everything? Let's do same mesh name. Same thing with the thickness. Only the same mesh name. ID, guys, vertex color, because I'm exporting out of ZBrush. If you're exporting with something else like mesh IDs, polygon submesh IDs, I'm not too familiar with those, but I know with my workflow with ZBrush, a vertex color is great. Because in ZBrush, that's all we're doing is applying color to individual vertices, which in sense is vertice color. So we really don't need to change anything else besides that. So I'm going to hit bake textures and pause it, and we'll see what the results are. All right, and we're back, guys. It took about 20-25 minutes to bake everything. However, I got all my bakes turned out great. You guys can kind of see everything looks really nice and clean. Yeah, it worked out really well. Just to double check, you guys can come over here where we're getting those errors earlier. Now it's nothing but smooth, clean bakes. It's really nice. All right, so scrolling down the texture set settings, these are all the maps that we told it to bake, right? So we've got our ID map. Now, if you hover over this, it doesn't really do anything. But if you come down here and go to textures, and do you guys remember what material we applied to Brutus? I think it was called default, right? You can see that in the upper right-hand corner in the texture set list. So theoretically, if we type in default, we're going to see all those textures. And now if you hover over them, you're going to get a little preview of what that bake ended up looking like. And so, yeah, everything looks good. I got a world space. I've got my thickness, my ambient occlusion. They all turned out great. Yeah, so here we go. We've got texture set settings. We can kind of minimize that now, or kind of hide that if we want. It's not super imperative that we see that now. Viewer settings. Guys, this is all about like the viewport. It's kind of like if you're in Marmoset, right? You can play with your display settings or your post-processing. You can come down here and activate post-processing effects with what is it, the IBIS 2, whatever that is. Enable depth of field, color correction. I mean, it's like Marvelous, right? Or not Marvelous, Marmoset toolbag. So I'll cover that later, but we're really not gonna cover that stuff right now. But layers, right over here on the right hand side, these kind of work just like Photoshop, just exactly like you would expect them to act. You'll notice in my toolbar I have the brush icon or the paint icon selected. So under properties, it's showing me my brush properties. Kind of like brush size, the flow. Guys, flow is kind of like opacity. If you're used to Photoshop or something. Spacing is obviously how far apart the strokes apply to the mesh when you're painting. You can choose the angle if you're using a brush that's angled or something. And you'd have it down here. We can come down here and find brushes, and we have a whole different bunch of brushes to choose from. Now what's cool about this is you guys can load in brushes. I think, I could be wrong here, it's been a while, but I think you can load in ABR brushes, same kind of brushes that you use, say, in Photoshop, I think. Someone will have to double check me on that one. So yeah, right now we have no layers at all. We have one layer, I guess, and it's empty. So typically I just delete that layer. It's not really a big deal, but I usually come in and add a fill layer. Now you guys will notice, since I've added a fill layer and it is selected right now, my properties are associated with the fill layer, not the brush, right? So this fill layer, we have a bunch of different options. We've got height, roughness, metallic, normal. And we also have this height thing in here too, right? So I guess we have all these things. Base color, if I wanted this base color to be, I don't know, the color Brutus. It's a bit more orange, I think, and a bit more saturated. Maybe something like that. So that's cool. So we can change colors. Roughness, we can make something feel a bit more matte, where it feels almost like clay. Or if we crank it all the way up to 0, it feels very plasticky or glossy, right? So that's cool. We've also got metalness by default. It's set to basically nothing. If we start to move that further, we get more metalness in this, right? So now it almost looks like a pure metal, like a really slick metal. So you guys can play with roughness, metalness, and kind of see what you like. Typically, guys, something is either metal or it's not. Sometimes you can get away with something in the middle, but typically I kind of like to keep these at one end of the spectrum or the other. So now height, we're not going to play with height right now, but we'll get into things like height normal in a little bit. Yeah, I just kind of want to go over creating some different layers. So I've created a layer for Brutus, and I want this to feel a bit more rough, or I should say a bit less rough, closer to that of the logo of the bulldog, something like a skin or so. So I'm going to create another layer. This layer, we can call this one, Brutus. This other layer, we're going to do that for, say, the collar. Okay. Now, if you guys remember, the collar is red. So let's go ahead and crank that guy up, make it red. That looks about good to me. Maybe we can desaturate it a bit. Not a fan of super saturated colors. Actually, let's go back and bring that down a bit more. Something a bit more realistic. That looks good. Let's give it a bit of an orange now. Let's go red. All right, so obviously we want this layer to be masked only on the collar. So what I can do is I can right-click the layer and say add a mask with a color selection. So you can see below the layer we've added this property to the layer, right? And under properties we can see here that I've got this ID mask. And we bake that, and that's based on the polypaint information from ZBrush. So I can say pick a color. And we'll just come in here and grab the red. And now it's applying that layer to that mask. And you can actually see the mask right here, which is kind of cool. So when I'm texturing, guys, I typically try and treat this kind of like a painting, where I'm just kind of blocking in colors at first, and then I'll go into more and more detail from there. Now we could create another solid layer. We could say white's good, but we want to add a little bit of color to it. Nothing crazy. Maybe a little less color, a little brighter. That's good. And we'll say mask with color selection and pick a color and that purple within the eyes. There we go. Now, something to think about here, guys. With the color selection, you have a tolerance. So you can say, oh, bring that tolerance way up. And what it's going to do is it's just going to increase the tolerance of that. So colors that are similar to that purple, like the blues, it's going to start to catch. So that's kind of interesting. Now, eyes, they're going to be a bit more specular, right? If you're kind of coming from the old school days with me, now we're going to say they're a bit more rough. So I can come in here and make these guys a bit more rough. So I get more of the reflections showing up, which is pretty cool. You know, it's all that PBR workflow stuff, right? Which is really neat. I guess we can go through and do the same thing with the pupils. So I can actually, if I don't want to create a new layer and start over, I can just hit Control D and it duplicates a layer. Now I can make this layer say something like, I don't know, black or pretty close to it. But you'll notice it's still retaining that mask information from the layer below it. So all I have to do is click on the mask, and now I have color selection, and I can delete that purple color, and now it's applied to nothing. But I can now pick another color and say, oh, use that guy in there in the eyes, and then boom, there we are. Nice looking reflections within the eyes. Pretty neat. Now, if I was smart, I'd start naming these things. Pupil, eyes, color, collar, and we've got a few things still left to texture. Okay, guys, so at this point, you know, I'm starting to get a bunch of layers, and so you notice here pupil still has the expanded for the mask. If I could just click on the fill part, it'll hide the mask stuff, which is kind of nice to kind of help. Oh, I don't know, clean that up a bit. We don't really need texture sets, so I'm just going to move this up a bit. Maybe move this guy over, and there we go. So I'm going to create another layer, another fill layer. This time we'll do something like the tongue. And from here I'll go ahead and create another mask with color selection. Pick the tongue. There we are. Cool. So you guys can see how important it is to bake your IDs, right? Your color IDs. It's really easy to go fill objects that way. If you're not, then you have to go hand paint that, and you might be, you know, it might be kind of difficult to do that. Now, something to think about here. I'm going to create a new layer. We're going to do the teeth. And I'm going to do a teeth. Instead of a fill layer, I'm just going to click on this guy. And this is just a random layer. And notice I have the brush icon selected, and I have the brush properties here. So if I start brushing, it'll brush anywhere I want based on the brush that I have. So let's go to the brush menu. And I can grab any kind of brush, dirt, whatever. And I can paint wherever I want. And you'll notice, since that layer is on top, and that layer that I'm painting with, this brush, you know, this brush has height, roughness, metallic settings. So if that layer is on top, it's this roughness is going to override the roughness in the layer below it. But if I move it down below, you'll see it kind of goes into the background. So yeah, they work as expected. So I'm going to go ahead and just delete that layer, create another normal layer, and we're going to do the teeth. So I'm going to grab a normal brush, like the default hard and default soft is what I use typically. And I'm going to paint on, say, this big tooth. Maybe use the bracket key to lower this a little bit. And let's pretend I didn't have IDs for that guy. I have to go in and hand paint it. Well, if we hit F3, we'll go into 2D mode. And boom, look at that. There's my white on this guy, which is pretty cool. Now, if I continue to paint with this brush and I keep going over, you notice I'm painting on the right side, but it's filling in the left side of the tooth, right? Even the bottoms. And that's amazing in Substance. Like we used to, back in the day, in the early 2000s, it was really hard to go and paint seams and worry about coming over and touching up the other seams, and it was just a giant pain in the butt. So I've just filled this tooth in, but let's zoom out. You see what's happening is I'm painting basically in 3D space. So if I hit F2, you can see what's happening is that brush is essentially painting like it's covering all those objects. So let's go back and hit F2, or sorry, F3, and I'm going to undo those strokes. And so the reason the brush that I'm using is doing this is if we scroll up here and we say tangent wrap, it's going to wrap around other objects nearby. But if I paint only in UV space, now I can kind of zoom in and paint on the tooth, and it's only painting it's only painting in UV space. And when you get along the edges, this is one thing I don't really care for with Substance that I hope they change maybe, is the brush gets way bigger on the edges. And honestly, I can't tell you guys why it does that. You might have to look around, but you'll notice I'm painting here and it's actually kind of hitting these other areas because the brush is just getting giant. What I can do, right, is I can come down here and say, oh, let's see here, one second. Okay, so I can come down here, or up here, sorry. I'm going to turn my flow down to 0. Now when I paint over here, nothing happens. So let's turn the flow back up. And so it's really hard for me to erase that stuff, right? Which is interesting. So I'm going to undo all of this again. Sorry, but I think this is going to help kind of explain this stuff. What I'm going to do is I'm going to fill this layer, this blank layer with nothing on it. I'm going to go ahead and put a black mask. And that says that whatever this layer is, and guys, you have to make sure too that you're painting on the layer, not the mask. So what I'll do is I'll go to the layer, and I'll fill this guy in again. And it looks like I need to make sure my brush is white. That's all good. Okay. Okay, scratch that. So, sorry, this is the first part in the tutorial. I'm backstepping a little bit. Let's just do a fill layer. And let's go back to 3D mode and see, do the teeth look good? They could be a little less rough. Something like that looks pretty good. Now I'll hit F3, and now I'll add that black mask. And now I'll paint only in the black mask. So I'll right click and say add a paint layer. Now in that paint layer, now I'm only painting in the mask. I'm not actually painting anything because it's already filled completely with that white color. Now that I have the paint selected, I'm going to come down here, make sure it's set all the way to white under grayscale, and I can start to paint this in. And now I might want to come in and choose default hard, and I might want to change it from tangent wrap to UV, and now I can paint solely on this guy. Now you see, since the brush gets bigger on the edges down there, it's hitting that piece. So I can come back down here, turn it to black, lower my brush size, grab my Wacom pen here, and I can just paint this out, which is great. So, if you guys have something like, we had the nose that we had to paint in manually, this would be a great way to do that. Now this fill layer, I can go ahead and say add bit mask with color selection, and it deletes that paint layer. And I'll just say pick color, pick the teeth, and now all the teeth have that material applied, which is great. Now if you guys remember, the logo looks something like this. So the spikes and the torus and those guys need to be white as well. And the nose actually has that really bright highlight on it, even though it's black. So we're going to go ahead and fill those in as well. So I'm just going to duplicate this layer that I had for the teeth, and I should call this layer teeth. And for color selection, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of the teeth and say I want to pick the spikes. And so now these, we could call these spikes. And they're going to get the same treatment as that torus, so I may as well go down to color selection and just pick another color and say torus. Now I've got both of those colors on that layer, which is great. So I actually call this spikes torus. And the medallion was also that ferrous gold color, which is great. And now I just have to paint the nose. So I'm going to create a fill layer. And I'm going to make this layer black or close to it. And the nose had that bright highlight. So let's turn the roughness. Maybe about there looks pretty good. And that's about it. So I'm going to go ahead and put a black mask on. And now it's my job as the artist, since I was dumb in my sculpt and didn't make an ID mask for that. I'm just going to have to go in and paint this by hand. So I'll pause the video while I'm doing this and pick it up in a second. And guys, sometimes, you know, it's hard to kind of navigate around here, right? And just kind of make sure everything's getting colored correctly. Sometimes it's just easier to hit F3, you know, and kind of zoom in here and paint in your texture versus 3D mode, which is really, really nice. All right, cool. So yeah, we got the nose. Let's call this guy the nose. But now we've got these little things, right? In the muzzle. Click this guy here. Got these little dots. I'm expecting those need to actually extrude inward. So we're gonna just create another layer here, fill layer. We'll make it black. And those little guys should have really no roughness. Something like that. And we'll say black mask. And I'll create a paint layer. And I'm already got the default hard brush, so I'm just gonna, what has he got? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So he's got like one in the middle, surrounded by like a star. So like boom, maybe boom, 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 something like that. So that looks good, and I can make those bigger if I needed to. Just increase my brush size and click over what I already drew, just to make it easier to see from far away. It's not a super detailed model, so I want to make sure that my, everything reads proportionally. So those look pretty good. I'm not doing this for any client, so I'm just going to kind of run through it. Now, if we want those to extrude inward, we can click on the fill layer itself and come down here to height and go negative. And boom, those guys are going negative now, which is awesome. And what's going to happen when we export the normal map, that height information is going to get added to the normal map as if it were in part of the high poly, which is really cool. So you guys could add all kinds of detail simply in in Substance, like you would do with Undo or something. Except now it's just easier, I think. All right, guys. Something else worth noting: if you're working on a low poly object or something where you're simply just hand painting in and you want to fill polygons, you can come up here and grab this guy. It's a polygon fill button. And we obviously probably need to have a blank layer for this. So if I click blank layer, I have that as an option now. And what I can do is I can come in and select those guys, and it fills it with whatever color I have selected over here, which is kind of neat. So you can create material ID masks that way, which I could have done for the nose, but my topology doesn't really follow the nose that well, as you can see there. So that's cool. We can also activate symmetry at any point we want, and we can paint symmetrically in 3D, which is really cool. Now, this is not a symmetrical model, so I really have no use for that right now. But just something to think about, okay, guys? I really don't use the toolbar that often, and then also something else, if you got a big complex object, you can always hit F and focus on what you're working on. Okay, so let's take a look at the logo again. We've got these black lines that, it's part of the art style with, logos like this, but it just typically means that looking at this guy, I really don't see much shadow there. I get it in the normal map, but I want it in the shadow. So I'm going to create a brand new, we can delete this guy. I need a brand new fill layer, and we're going to make this guy very dark. And we'll actually tint it red a little bit. And I'm going to say no roughness, no metallic, just a color, right? So I can actually turn off height, roughness, and metal. And now I'm just simply getting color, and you can see the roughness from the layers below it are there now because I don't have it in this layer, which is really cool. So I've got no roughness. I've got no metallic. If I wanted roughness, I might need it here. I'm going to keep it down all the way. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say add a bitmap mask, and I can fill it with this ambient occlusion mask that we baked. And by default, it inverts it. So I can always right-click on the mask itself and say invert mask. And then now you guys can see if I turn this on, toggle it on and off, man, it's really starting to shade those areas and then cracks and crevices. And what's cool is I've told this layer to have no roughness. So now, even though the eyes have roughness, or the skin has a bit of roughness, those cracks and crevices do not. Now to take this further, I can change this layer from a normal fill mode to something like a multiply. And then we can always, again, hit Control D to duplicate the layer and get more of an effect. And if I want to, I can select this layer on top and say I want this to be way more red. And we should actually start to see that. You guys see the red tint going on in the cracks and around the eyes, and it's just starting to really look cool. I'm really happy with the way this is starting to turn out now. So we've added some ambient occlusion layers essentially, right? So what I can do is I can create a new folder, and I can call this folder AO. And I can grab both of these guys by holding Control and just drag them into the AO layer. Now that it changes a little bit now, you see how there's more red? This group, this folder is set to normal. It overrides any of the blending modes that are in the layers inside of the folder. So these are both set to multiply. So I can say, hey, put that to multiply. There we go. Looking good. Now you guys can put all kinds of layers inside of folders, and this whole folder you can actually right click it and tell it to create a smart material from that. I think it's around here somewhere. And you guys can actually create smart materials in Substance Designer that you can import into Painter and use. However, they do have, if we come down here to smart materials, a bunch of presets loaded for you that work great. And you guys can use these and edit them as you see fit. Now, something else I like to do. This is a organic character, right? We're working with a logo, but if I were to make this guy for say something like a Pixar, or just wanted to feel a little bit cartoony but realistic at the same point, I need to add some subsurface scattering. There's going to be light. SSS, right, is light penetrating a semi-permeable object and then leaving in a different location from which it enters. Luckily, our thickness map essentially bakes that out for us. So I can create another fill layer. I'll make this guy super bright red so we can see what we're doing. Let's see here. I don't want any roughness, no metallic, no normal, no height. Just want color. Okay, so I'm going to say add bitmap mask, and you'll notice it gives us a search bar up here, and I'm just going to type in thickness. And there's our thickness. Now again, it's putting it in the inverse location, so I can always right click on the mask and say invert the mask. Something else I wish was standard with Substance. Now you notice that red's a bit intense, but it's putting it in locations that are thinner than the thicker objects, where light would be more susceptible to having that SSS effect. So I can set this to something like multiply, but you guys know if you're ever doing rendering compositing, subsurface scattering is light penetrating an object, and anything that's light is usually added. So we can select linear dodge or add. We can also, if you want a more subtle effect, you guys can select screen. And okay, that's starting to look pretty good, right? However, it's kind of coming in some areas. Like the teeth don't really need red SSS. The nose and some of the face don't really. I just need it like maybe a little bit in the muzzle, the cheeks, and the ears. That's it. I don't need it on the spikes, anything else. So I'd have to create a mask for that, but if I do a mask color selection here, it's going to delete all that. So what I can do is I can create a new folder, put this guy in the folder, and normal overrides screen. So I'm going to set this to match as screen. And now this folder, I'm going to create a black mask. And so this mask overrides that mask, but that mask is still there. So this mask, I'm going to say, I want to add a color selection to that mask. I'm going to pick just the skin. And so now we only see this mask through this mask. And what I can do is, do we like the red on the nose? In certain parts, maybe. But I can right click and I can say add a paint layer. And now I can change my paint, because if I go white, it's just going to add that wherever I paint, right? Or technically it should, but I'm going to go ahead and go down to black. And now if I paint with black, you'll see it's getting rid of the SSS effect wherever I'm painting. So at this point, guys, I'm going to go to this paint layer, and I have the brush properties. So I can say, oh, let's change the alpha to, softer alpha. And let's turn down the flow from 100, so it's not 100% opacity. This should be, you guys could call flow opacity. So turn that way down. Let's make this guy a little bit bigger, and let's just softly kiss the nose. And now we've got a really limited SSS around there. It's still kind of there, but it's not super noticeable anymore. It's still kind of there. It's helping give us some color to things. And if I don't like any of the SSS in some areas, you can just paint it out. You just got to use your artistic eye here. Be creative. And, some of the SSS areas are starting to feel a bit too yellow compared to the rest. The rest actually feels kind of neat. So what I'm going to do is I can just take the whole group in the folder and just turn the opacity down a bit. And then boom, we have that subtle subsurface scattering effect going on in those areas just on the skin. So that's really neat. Next thing I want to talk about is maybe using some of these smart material presets for other things. Like maybe we want to add some wear and some tear to like the collar, right? So I'm just gonna, click on these guys to minimize the how much is going on here in my layer view. Everything looks good. And I'm just going to call this guy SSS. Again, dude, one of the things I've noticed with Substance is I typically have a ton of layers. And so someone that was just opening this might not actually know what's going on with some of my Substance files. But, if you're, the more you spend in Substance, the better you can pick apart someone else's file for sure. All right, let's get that collar looking, I don't know, like some cool next-gen PBR wear and tear on it. If this was going into a gritty game, it's going to be a different art style than the rest of the dude, but we'll work with it. Again, this is just a 101 intro tutorial on Substance, so let's go. Let's do it. I'm going to grab this machinery one. I really like this, and throw it at the top. And guys, this is a smart material, which means it's essentially just a group or a folder with a bunch of materials inside of it. And you'll notice this red bar is still going. It's calculating, it's rendering this stuff out, it's applying it to the mesh based on all the different texture maps. Because as you guys know, some of these layers inside of it are using some of these maps over here, like curvature, thickness, position, all that stuff. So let's click on the layer and say, I want to add a mask with color selection. Say only add it to the red color. Now, obviously, the machinery is default to this yellow. So let's expand the folder and come down here to the metal base. And let's just change it to red. And there we are. And now we've got some height information in some of these layers, it looks like. I'm assuming that's maybe rust. Yep, there it is. So what I can do, if I want that to go negatively, I can select the rust layer, and I could come down to the mask, and we've got this. We've got this new thing that I haven't even talked about yet, which is, if we were to select this, it's one of these generators, and this generator is using a mask, and this mask is using my ambient occlusion, my curvature map, like all these different things, and so I can turn down the global balance based on those texture maps. We can wait and see what this looks like, and oh, boom, there we go. So sometimes you get good results with smart materials. Sometimes they don't work the way you want. It's fine, delete it. Let's pretend we wanted to add just like maybe some paint. Maybe this red layer here is paint for the color. So I'm going to go down here, select the color, and do like a brand new. I guess we can just drag it. Well, let's just do it like a fill layer. I love using fill layers. And we're going to put this over the collar. We wait. And we're going to say add mask with color selection, pick that guy. And I can keep it white for now, that's fine. Now you guys notice Substance is starting to chug a little bit. Well, the reason is because I'm using a 4K texture map, and I'm painting right now in a 4K texture map, so that's a big texture to be updating real time. So what I can do at any point, guys, where we're working, is we come up here to texture settings and put our size down to like 1024. It's adaptive, right? So it's actually going to reduce the texture quality, and you guys can see that in the eyes and the nose and everything. It's going to reduce it to a 1024. But you guys know Substance is great because at any point I can up-res it back to the 4K because it's doing it all in 3D, which is great. So now it's running much smoother, really fast. And so back here to this white layer, we added this color selection to it, right? But what I want to do is actually I want to put it in a group so I can add another mask to it. And in this group, I'm going to say, let's add a, well, we could add any kind of mask if we wanted to, but we've also got masks set up for us over here. So we can go to Smart Masks, and bam, look at this. We've got all kinds of cool stuff. We've got like dust on the edges, or the occlusions. We've got, you know, edge dusty. Let's throw that guy on the folder. And so now, boom, we've got dusty mask on the edges of just that guy. And so I don't really care for that one, so I'm going to undo that. Let's find something a bit more crisp. And you know what? Let's just put it on anyway. If I wanted to tighten this up, right, we can actually see what that mask looks like. I can right click and say add a levels. And now I can adjust the levels of that mask, making it a bit more crisp and clean. Look at that. That's pretty cool. And I didn't have to hand paint any of that stuff. It's just boom, it's there. So now, do I really want that to just look like white? No. What do you guys think a dog collar would look like? I don't really know. I mean, I do have a dog, but collars are usually fabric. But this guy looks like it's some kind of like really chunky metal, ferocious kind of thing. So let's pretend it was made from like steel or iron, and then the red paint was just paint on top of it that's chipped away over time. So what I can do is I can grab this fill layer and I can say, okay, I want it, that color's fine, but let's make it more metallic. So now, boom, it already is immediately looking more metallic. And at any point, if we want that to look lighter, you're darn right. We can make it lighter, we can make it darker. We can even add it a bit of a tint of blue. And now really starting to feel like it's metal. And that's pretty cool looking. I don't think it really matches the style of the rest of the Bulldog, but hopefully you guys can apply that to other things. So these smart masks are amazing. They're straight up really cool. If you got a character standing on the ground, you can use the ground dirt and adjust that mask settings. And you can add dirt just to the feet of your character. Why? Because we've baked a position mask and we've baked a world space normal mask. Or map, which, you know, tells us, hey, this is up, this is down, it's left, right, forward, back, X, Y, Z, right? So that's cool. I'm gonna kind of let this lie for now. Now let's say, oops, F. Let's say I wanted to, you know, put an F stamp on here because Brutus has this F, and it looks like it's extruding outward, maybe. At least that's how I'm interpreting it. So what I need to do is I need to open up Photoshop and load in my own custom alpha, because if we go to alphas here, we've got a bunch of alphas that are really cool. But I guess let's not open up Photoshop. You guys can grab actually a Photoshop file, a JPEG, a GIF, anything you want, and you can import it in here. You can actually import it as part of the project. So that way, wherever you take this project, that alpha comes with it. You don't need to, you know, bring the raw file with you somewhere. It's not going to look for it on your C drive or your G drive or your desktop. It's going to actually be part of the file. That being said, if I save this, Control S, and I open up this folder where I have all my stuff, Brutus SS or .spp is already at almost 700 megs. It's almost a gig already, and in my opinion, I've hardly done anything to this. I mean, I've got like a couple layers, but man, a gig is pretty big. But the reason it's so big is because it brings all of this stuff in the file with you, which is great. Now, if you guys ever bake maps and you bake again, you can come down. It's going to keep those in your file. So if you want to reduce your file size, you can always come up here and say File Clean. and hit OK, and it cleans any textures that it's baked or created or anything that you've imported that's not being used, and it will get rid of it, therefore reducing your file size, which is really neat too. I love having a standalone PBR texturing application like Substance versus, say, something else, because of things like that. You guys will also notice here I've got these Aspen files, and that's my dog. We have all these Aspen files, and guys, these are the files that are created when we baked. And these, if we click these are like 60 meg files. I don't know what these are, but I'm assuming they're like cages. Cage information, baking from the high poly to low poly. So if I were to bake this guy again, it would just use this Aspen file to give it the data it needed, and it would bake much faster. So that's kind of that. Anyways, let's get down, and instead of putting an F here, let's put the Substance logo. So I'm just going to come over here, create a brand new fill layer. Stella. In this fill layer, I'm going to put a black mask on it. And I'm going to come over here and click Add Paint, or we could just paint on that mask layer, but I like to add a paint layer because, guys, you could put as many paint layers as you want here, which is really great. With this paint layer, I can come on down and grab, double-click the S, and then boom, there it is. And we want to make sure that this S is set to white, which it is, and I can increase the size with the bracket key and click once, and there it is. Now it's light like that because that's the color of the layer that I'm putting it on. So it looks like that's the red color, so I can use the color picker, grab the red from my color, make that okay. And from here, and you know what? The reason why it's so light is actually because my flow, I need to put my flow back up. There we go. I'm just gonna undo that, re-add it, go back to color, color pick, and just clicking and dragging onto the red. And I thought that F was extruding outward. You guys could have it do whatever you want, but I'm going to say height, make that sucker pop out. And boom, it's almost like it was baked in even though it wasn't, which is really great. So yeah, anyways, you guys can also go in and hand paint. If I wanted to create a brand new layer that was, a brand new fill layer that was dark and it had no roughness to it, and maybe it was colored a little bit, and then it was a multiply, and maybe it was a little bit less colored, it was just kind of dark, I could add a black mask to it, and then I could paint in white with my flow turned down on, say, the soft brush. Let's go to brushes, grab the default soft, make this guy a bit bigger. I could actually start to paint that in those areas, and if I turn the flow down, it's going to be a much more subtle effect, which is really cool. And so now, you have to use your art skills to go and hand paint areas that you want to be darker, lighter, etc. And we could make this guy a little bit more saturated if we wanted to. And so, guys, we'd have to just kind of paint some of that stuff in. Yeah, anyways, I think that I've kind of covered, I don't know, just at the top of my head, a lot of the basics here in Substance, at least enough to get you guys going. There's tons of really cool tutorials out there, a bunch of different ways you can use the masks and the brushes, and I didn't even talk about the particle brushes at all. Those are neat. I hope you guys have fun with those. I hardly touched on smart materials, but there's tons of really cool ones in here that you guys can play with and edit. The purpose of this tutorial is at least to get you to that point where you can go in and start having some fun and painting. So anyways, I think the tutorial's coming up to like something like an hour now, and I think that's way too long, but hopefully you've got enough information here to keep going and have fun with this. So thank you for watching, and I look forward to hanging out with you guys more. So thanks.